Ladies, gentlemen, fellow Titans out there, welcome to this video reviewing the final 6 episodes of Titan Season 4. And yes, these are the last ever episodes of this whole entire series. So obviously what we're going to do here is a no spoilers review. I do want to stress there are no spoilers in this. These are just my thoughts. How do I feel about the next 6 episodes? How do I feel about how it all ended for the Titans? How it all ended for the big bad, Brother Blood? I'm just going to give you a best as can be taste for what's to come. So if you've been living under a rock and you didn't know already, Titan Season 4 is coming out with Part 2 this week, this Thursday, releasing Episode 7 and 8 first, then weekly from there on out. So initially, one thing I do want to say, Gar's episode, titled Dude, Where's My Gar, was actually Episode 7, originally. The first episode you were going to see coming back with Part 2, but it has been moved to Episode 9. This is the one that many people have been looking forward to due to the Stargirl crossover that we've been hearing about for a long time. And as a result of this episode being moved to Episode 9, what I will say is that we don't get any Gar this Thursday, so no Beastboy in Episode 7 or 8. And that may sound like a little bit of a bummer to many of you because people want more Beastboy this season, but what I will say is, like, trust me here, Episode 9 more than makes up for it, and we'll get into that in a little bit. My first impressions of Part 2 compared to Part 1, like right from the top of my head, is that it does truly feel like the next chapter. Like, episodes are stepping up a notch in all areas, and so are the stakes as a result of that. Everyone has been waiting for Sebastian to get into his Brother Blood mode, and the episode does kick off immediately with some fantastic teasers for his journey ahead, and he has a badass score to accompany his rising villainy. And this episode, or double episode if you will, so I'm going to be talking about Episode 8 here at the same time, is really about the Titans, I would say, touching base with what they are to do next, with Sebastian also realizing that next step, both episodes being a push for him to be closer to realizing his destiny. But that being said, at the same time, I know some people weren't a massive fan of Part 1 being this slow burner, such as Sebastian slowly but surely stepping into Brother Blood over the first 6 episodes, with some fans just kind of wanting him to get into that suit quicker, getting a bit more villainy action in there, just going all out diabolical, evil Brother Blood mode. However, for me, one thing I was maintaining during Part 1 is that I personally enjoyed that approach because simply we get to know the character first, his history, build him up, and flesh out the context of what makes him the full version of the character you'll eventually see. But here's the thing, to set expectations correctly for you guys for this week's double episode drop, and from here on out, that road does continue for a little longer, if you will. And what I mean to say is, don't expect him to go full on ham Brother Blood right away in those first 2 episodes, or even after that. Like, it does take a while to get into it, and that's not to say, and I don't want to scare anyone off here, or while we don't get into the full suited mode for quite some time, Sebastian's journey still continues in intriguing ways, and compared to Part 1, rapidly so, where you get to see more fuel that amplifies the character's dramatic change. But I would say, 7 and 8 doesn't really dive into that head over heels like I think a lot of people expected after he entered the Blood Pit. But the cool thing about this journey, you do see Joseph Morgan slip more into that version and character and thus role he plays so incredibly well, and I know many fans of Joseph Morgan know exactly what I mean there, as well as Sebastian's confidence growing over the next few episodes, so does that entertainment. Now meanwhile, with Superboy in these first couple of episodes, he goes off in his own direction and leaning quite a lot more into that Luthor heritage. This brings back an interesting character from the past. Again, can't really get into it, spoiler review here. And Connor is determined to just navigate this obstacle they're all facing, except by himself, which does separate him from the Titans, but in a way that opens very interesting new doors for him and new alliances to be forged as the episodes unfold, even beyond these two. So again, here, one thing to bear in mind is just all while the Titans were operating as a full unit in part 1, which was a refreshing change from previous seasons. That's something I praised part 1 for. In part 2, considering we don't get Gar with the Titans for quite some time, not as long as Superboy or anything like that, but yeah, considering there's no Gar for a while and Connor goes off in his own direction for the majority of part 2, as a result, the team is obviously reduced by a couple of numbers. But I still don't think this necessarily regresses the team dynamic that they have brought to this season. We do still have Dick, Kory, Rachel, and Tim together pretty much most of the time. And when considering what story we get with Gar and Superboy, they're both super relevant to their arcs this season. But it is just something you have to think about, that it's not so much of a proper like Teen Titans, dynamic in the back half outside of, some of the core members I have to mention. Now, as I look at my notes here, episode 7 and 8, and I think people are going to like this, also pairs up Dick and Kory quite nicely, and all of the seeds of their connection really start to grow. Not that, they haven't already been there, or that we haven't had it teased with visions already, but every step along the way with Dick and Kory and the circumstances they face in these first 2 particular episodes, it brings them closer together more than ever before, and I think Dickory fans are going to love that, especially as, the season or the back half progresses. Other things to mention, we do get a big progression with Tim and Bernard's relationship in these first 2, as Tim and Bernard are kind of assisting the team in a way that's a bit outside the bubble, but I think that line will make more sense to you guys when you see the episodes. But ultimately, what I have to say about these first 2, episodes 7 and 8 of part 2, is that I am very happy that they're deciding to drop these 2 episodes at once, because episodes 7 and 8 still go at that similar pace compared to part 1. It's still very plot relevant, especially with the lead the Titans get that could give them a great step up over Sebastian and Mother Mayhem, and they find themselves in quite a culty and very dangerous situation as per what's been teased in the trailer, but it doesn't necessarily, as I've kept mentioning, go knee deep into the crazy, oh my god, Brother Blood versus Titans right here, right now, crazy. But it does take some crucial steps into that of the Church of Blood's plan. So I'm glad that fans don't have to watch episode 7, wait a week, then episode 8, wait another week for episode 9, because I think fans would want things moving along quite a lot more by then if it went down that way, if they were to only get episode 9 3 weeks later after the episode 2 air date. I do feel like episodes 7 and 8 would lose a few points for some people, maybe even some interest. Again, it cooks it along, but I do feel like it meanders a little bit while everything ramps up at the same time. So the fact that you get to binge these first 2 is a very good thing in my mind. But that is not happening in terms of like the episode 9 delay. We get episode 9 just a week after episode 7 and 8's release this Thursday. And here's the thing I do have to say. I do acknowledge that people might want the plot to go forward more into the Brother Blood stuff, but that does kick off more in episode 10. Like, that's really where the rapid downhill slide goes. And I understand if, let's say, you're just not so invested in Beastboy and you're just like, no, I want to get on with everything else. But trust me here, even if you just want to get a move on into what's going on with these other things, all while this feels like somewhat of a detour episode, so 3 episodes in, we kind of pivot. So in that sense, the main plot takes another back seat here. It's still an episode that I have to acknowledge has been long desired for fans of Beastboy, and most certainly earns its place as it's been a long time coming for this character. So episode 9 most certainly takes a deep dive into Gar's connection with the Red. Like, it explores the fascinating lore that comes with it. It covers Gar's past trauma, making this episode a very, very significant personal story for him. And I was totally for that. It just covers so much ground from the past and what all of this new discovery means for his present, and yet really getting a direction for his destiny. And it gets very trippy, and I mean very, very trippy. It gets extremely introspective in the most endearing ways. It even has some awesome awaited action from Beastboy doing things that I think people have been waiting for a hot minute. And again, can't get into spoilers, but I think some of you guys can maybe guess what I'm talking about there. And my God, I know this is what a lot of people will be wondering about. I know everyone has been anticipating this Stargirl crossover in this episode. Maybe not everyone, because some people didn't watch Stargirl, but obviously that's what a lot of chatter has been about with regards to this episode. So, Stargirl, okay, awesome. You know, Stargirl, you know. But seriously, as for what else they pack into this episode, can't get into spoilers. I know I keep saying that, it must be irritating, but seriously, I wish I could. I think I just need to leave it to Jerome Valeska, because he really does describe how I'm feeling right now about everything else, especially in the back half of episode 9.
Hang on to your hats, folks, because you ain't seen nothing yet.
I don't want to overhype it, but this episode is not one to miss. Even if you're like, I just want to get back into the main plot, like episode 7 and 8, you know, well, it was cool. I just still didn't get really into it. Oh, now episode 9 is a bit of a, you know, self-contained story for Gar and all of that, and you're not so into Gar, maybe. I'm just trying to cater to all audiences here. You do not want to miss it, especially when we get to the back half. I was certainly surprised. I kind of knew what to expect with some chatter out there, but you ain't seen nothing yet. Now, as we get into episode 10, things are starting to now ramp up even more. So if you've been feeling a certain way through episode 7, 8, and 9, you just kind of want to get into it more, as I keep saying, that's finally starts to happen. Now, all while after episode 9, we do get back into the main story in episode 10. We do have a side story that is a direct fallout from Gar's episode 9. And it involves, once again, I hate being this ambiguous because it must be frustrating for people, just very interesting things. I wish I could say more, but oh man, they continue off of the back of episode 9 to fulfill some fan desires here. And it felt great to see this played out. I think people will still be like, I kind of want to just cook along the main story. There's only a couple of episodes left after this. But again, I take it as like they're just throwing a lot of things at the wall, given that these are the final episodes of the series. And you definitely get the indication that they knew this was coming. So they're trying to fulfill a lot of fan desires. And there's certainly a lot of that. But we do, instead of going full self-contained, have, you know, other scenes with the main plot of Sebastian and Superboy and whatnot. How do I explain it? Like, there's some really cool stuff that fans have been wanting to see for a long time. I can't really put it any other way. But as we go forward with episode's 10 main plot scenes, outside of that kind of side story that bleeds from the back of the previous episode, one of the highlights as this goes into the final episode is most certainly Superboy for me. His arc from here on out is like a really well explored one, and I would say, you know, even from part 1 up until this point in part 2 and from here on out, it is just, again, one of the highlights of this season. As we know, he's leaning into his Lex side more, and it's just really relevant to who the character is, because despite him being Superboy, of course, he does have this entire literal other side to himself that I felt part 1 set up fairly organically. And what I mean by that is, you know, Superboy has already tried to tackle the threat this season through his Connor Kent side, and he got his ass beat. He endured quite a bit of trauma along the way. So what we're seeing here is just this very interesting mask develop in his character in order to carry out the rest of this mission. And the reason why I like this so much is because all while he's giving into more of the Lex side, which brings along a pretty non-Titans-esque way of doing things, he does all of this without sacrificing who Connor is, or that other side of himself. It's just this very multifaceted arc for his character that is by far one of the most enjoyable parts from episode 10 all the way to episode 12. And as a result of Connor going down this path, this also brings him closer to none other than Joseph Morgan's Sebastian Sanger. And for reasons that I can't really get into, let's just say that their pairing provides for some really, really great scenes. They bounce off each other really well. Connor is quite crucial as well, and I'm trying to be ambiguous here, to to Sebastian's steps from this episode onwards that not only makes Sebastian take steps into his full brother blood self, but by leaps and bounds. Talking about leaps and bounds with Brother Blood, and it's just weird. I can see these bullet points and I can see it so vividly in my mind because I saw the episodes quite recently. Let's just say that his involvement with Mother Mayhem in episode 10 certainly takes a huge step in this episode that offers a very much so catalyst for his character with things to come. And from here on out, the power trip that Sebastian goes on until the final episode is all downhill from here, like in the best kind of ways. And also in terms of pacing, it's just no longer a slow burn. Things are moving and accelerating very, very quickly. And this is where Sebastian's threat becomes just no joke, not just for the Titans, but for the whole world. And honestly, all I can say here is that Joseph Morgan fans are going to love this. In this episode, we also get some good moments between Dick and Rachel. It kind of takes me back nostalgically to how they were quite a core duo from that of season 1, and where there's this thing that needs to be done for Raven, and Dick's willingness to help her out here highlights the whole chosen family theme. So I think fans of Dick and Raven will really enjoy the story behind this. One thing about Raven, though, I do want to say is that, while she is pretty much in a lot of scenes, she's with that team dynamic, as I mentioned earlier, I feel like White Raven is very underutilized, and I felt like that was a shame. So if you're expecting, like, the fact that she evolved from Raven to, like, White Raven, they do a couple of cool things, especially even in the first episode back. But I felt like they could have done so much more with White Raven and the fact that she's graduated to this kind of new power form. I didn't expect her to go like full White Raven from the source material with her abilities, but there's just so many moments that we're about to get into with like the final showdown and stuff where I felt like she could have been crucial, critical. It could have assisted with the execution and the writing and whatnot. I don't know how else to put it. Like, I did enjoy Tegan Croft and her character and whatnot, but I felt like she could have shined a lot more, and it felt like there were blatant gaps to do so. But what I'm speaking about with the latter there is most certainly more in the finale, but we'll get to that in a moment. But ultimately, by the end of episode 10, the Titans and even the world have felt the first big blow from Sebastian, and it's not quite over yet as things get complicated for both the heroes and the villains. And as we head into the final 2 episodes, the stakes just keep getting higher and higher, and it only goes all out from here onwards. So with regards to episode 11, I would say that the main plot scenes of this episode keep that pace, but we do get a side story with Tim Drake that is a great development for that of his Robin mode. So once again, to avoid the heavy spoilers here, what I would say and all I'm going to stick to is what we've seen in the Part 2 trailer. As many of you know from that, we're getting Curran Walters' Jason Todd's Red Hood back. And all while I do have to say this, it just is pretty blatant. I'm a bit conflicted about it. All while I do feel like Tim Drake's Robin training and ability this season, especially when you get to this episode, feel like insanely fast tracks just in terms of him going from like VR training with his bow staff to the capabilities and action you see him doing as Robin. It is still really awesome. Like, the moments we get of him in this episode are fantastic, and it really does feel like a legacy passing of the mantle moment from Robin, or ex-Robin, to Robin. Let's just say that Tim Drake goes on a journey to another place that we very much so know and love, and all while this is a bit of a side adventure, it most certainly was an inevitable moment for this character that was sprinkled across the episode scenes quite nicely. And as I'm sure many of you can imagine from the, I would say, very positive reactions to this suit, his suit in motion looks absolutely incredible. Jayla Cargo just looks so badass in it, and the way they incorporate Jason Todd into the story was very organic and complementary to the journey that Tim Drake goes on to become Robin. Meanwhile, with the Titans, they take the next big step into figuring out how to combat Brother Blood. Huge steps are taken with Sebastian and Connor, and at this point, we're just really catapulting into the series finale. And as you can imagine, this is when we go full on Brother Blood mode, as in full on Brother Blood mode. So in terms of where we're at right now and going into episode 12, I wish I could break this down more, but given how we're at the crucial part of this season, it really does feel near impossible to do so without spoiling critical things. And don't worry, I'm not going to do that. So what I will say is there are certainly things that I feel a bit unsure about as we end episode 11, especially as we get into the very beginning of episode 12. It's both very entertaining in terms of Brother Blood stuff, but there's a moment towards the beginning where it's like, oh, okay, so you did that. Like, oh, okay. So initially, like, okay, this is happening. Like, oh my god. But then, oh, so that happened, and I that's how I felt, and I don't know really how to feel about what happened there, and I'm not sure how fans are gonna feel about with a certain returning character and kind of what happens with the way they kind of wrote that. I mean, in one way, I see what they're going for, and this may just sound like a whole bunch of blabber, especially if you haven't seen it. And obviously, as I've already said, I'm gonna justify and explain how I feel when we get into the individual spoiler episode breakdowns. But just bookmark in your heads like the beginning of episode 12, the finale. But at the same time, as a fan of the show, with the way everything is getting all Armageddon-like, it does still tick plenty of boxes, even if it gets certainly messy at points. So it should go without saying, but I'm sure a lot of people will believe it, especially with Joseph Morgan's speciality here. But as we go into the series finale, Brother Blood is just so awesome. The suit looks fantastic, and so was the build up to this point with incorporating all of this dark magic and corruption in terms of his character arc. I will say that I do feel like we should have got the suit a bit earlier. I'm not saying it felt wasted, having it really highlighted in the finale, but just me vibing with my audience here or just knowing Titans fans, I do feel like a lot of people will be like, oh, like I wish they could have brought that back a little bit more so we could have enjoyed that mode of him a little bit more before the ending of the entire show. Other than that, I would say that things get pretty damn entertaining as things get out of control for everyone. The initial Titans plan makes a lot of sense, but the thing is, it's not exactly a guarantee, as kind of with what you would expect with such a powerful thread, so it makes it a very high-stakes situation, building up to a kind of we've got to risk it all approach. So it's pretty hard to kind of not be in on the ride at this point, even if you're noticing a few things here and there, which again, I can't really get into without going into a breakdown of a scene. So Brother Blood's plan and justification for where he's at by these closing episodes I felt were overall pretty decently built up across part 1 and part 2, and in the final episode through just, the very kind of corruption and, dark side-esque explanation of it all. Because obviously with magic and, the Church of Blood, I do kind of look at Sebastian's character, especially with the actual, newbie Sebastian reasonings he had in part 1. They apply a little bit of, Star Wars logic there with how there is a dark side, and if you go down that path, it does corrupt you a little bit. And obviously with the blood pit and going from there on out, a lot of that ties into his kind of hunger for power. As a result of that, though, I will most certainly say that it does lean into a bit of villainous tropes at points. But with that being said, it's not as though the season didn't lay the groundwork for what we witness with his character in these final 2 episodes. And as we get to the final showdown of Titans Season 4, I couldn't help but feel as though through introducing such a powerful threat this season, it also brought in some power scaling issues between him and the Titans that made it kind of hard for the writing to execute this showdown, in my opinion, in a believable way. So what I mean here, and again, this is going to be hard for people to grasp until you see the episode, but I'll try and explain it as best as I can without getting into any spoiler details, is that Brother Blood is very, very, very powerful. They show him doing extremely powerful and deathly things as teased in the Part 2 trailer, which, trust me, they're awesome, and Joseph Morgan owns it with his performance when he gets into full drunk on power Brother Blood mode, and it's certainly something I could watch all day. But as a result of that, when it comes to the true boss battle level stuff, I just simply had some issues with the execution. It's basically a situation of, oh, you've seen this character do this, that, and the other, injected with like pure peak power, but when it comes to the boss battle, the villain is not really using their power in the way they've demonstrated, quite literally, when they easily could. And I understand why. Like, a lot of shows, I do have to say, not that this is an excuse, do when introducing very powerful threats like this, if the villain was to do a certain thing, which they're clearly capable of doing, it would end the show there and then. Like, quite simply, if the writers had it go that way, it would be all over, right? So I guess by now you're starting to vibe kind of what I mean there. And as a result, that does display some clear issues to me that, you know, introduces a bit of plot armor, some plot contrivances for various characters and whatnot. But again, I do want to stress to also praise what's good about this, because I don't want this to seem like, oh, just as it's all ending, you're being so negative or whatever. You know, it's still very engrossing, like the spectacle to end things off on, you know, with whether that's the use of choreography, the way it's shot is really awesome. You even get glimpses at this in the trailer that you're probably seeing on screen right now. It does look badass, and that's something that I can't deny. But ultimately, to me, as I kind of wrote here, the way things were handled with the showdown kind of execution, it was just a bit iffy to me. And sure, one thing you could say is that you could put it down to the whole supervillain arrogance of it all. But again, that's where the somewhat villainous tropes come in. And then the more you go down that path, it feels as though you're kind of beginning to make excuses at that point, especially with what I've already mentioned, because, you know, when I thought about it after it, I analyzed it after seeing the scenes, I saw a clear and just alternative way that they could have tackled this climactic moment to just make it so much more believable, especially with a certain character not really being utilized. And if they were, it could have made the logic of it all just a lot more smoother. But here's the thing I would say with Titans and the way the writers kind of have them deal with moments like this, such as with the big bad, is that it kind of often favors tossing out some of the more believable and logical moments, if you will, or believable execution to propel their own hero as front and center. And an analogy I can kind of give there is that it's kind of like Batman fighting Superman just without the kryptonite, like no kryptonite whatsoever. You just kind of wouldn't really buy it, would you? Because you would just be like, why wouldn't Superman mop the floor with him? And I also do want to stress, it's not as though the other characters aren't doing anything, but again, all I'm trying to say is that there was clear and transparent solutions to the way I saw it go down. Other things that come to mind is that, you know, Kory, Starfire, again, fans of Starfire, she's blatantly had like a big plot this season, you know, whether that's from the early teasers of the prophecy and everything. So as you can imagine, things get very, very big for her. There's very cool moments there. And as for just like the overall ending, the actual ending, the kind of proper conclusion to this show after all has kind of been said and done, I would say that they do stick the landing there. It's a very, very satisfying ending to the series. And as I kind of teased earlier, the way they wrote this infers to me that they knew this was coming quite in advance. So there's a really, really, really nice closure for each and every character of the Titans. And there's some really, and I mean really, cool moments for a couple of them, especially one character in particular that I think fans have been wanting to see for absolutely forever. And when I saw it, I was like, damn, they actually did it. Wow, wow, wow. And I don't really know how else to go on about this ending. It's just, you know, whether you love part 2, whether you kind of enjoy it but find some issues, or whether you hate it, I would be hard-pressed to believe that by the ending scenes of, you know, episode 12, that you wouldn't say that, you know, like, I've enjoyed the show, I've watched 4 seasons of it, and this is like a really, really nice place to end things off on. So that's what I've got to say about Titan Season 4, Part 2, the ending to the entire freaking series. I apologize, even though I've rambled for quite a while, if you feel like I didn't get into certain areas, maybe some other characters more so than others, or whatever. It's just, I find it quite hard to do a no spoilers review when you can't obviously talk about any spoiler details, so you kind of have to dance around it yet still try and be informative. So I hope I did a half decent job here for you guys going into part 2. I'm looking forward to you guys seeing it. Let me know what you think. Are you excited for what's to come? Let me know what you thought of what I had to say. But if you've enjoyed this video, ultimately I would just like to say thank you for watching it. I'd really appreciate a like. Maybe even consider subscribing if you want to stay up to date with all kinds of news, reviews, and breakdowns like this on Titans, the episodes to come, other videos on the channel. But I'm going to love you and leave you now, guys. So again, thanks for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow Titans in the next video. Goodbye.